Sherwood City Council work session for December 7th, 2021.
So Mayor, Council, tonight we're going to talk about some rates as well as a follow back up with the water SDCs as well as the water rates. So storm, sanitary, and water. First, I'd like to introduce Deb, the project manager on this team. Deb's worked with the city doing rates probably since about 2012, as well as she's worked on our Wilsonville Sherwood agreements with us for financial stuff. And I believe Deb probably had a role when we were going to the Willamette, providing some behind the scenes with Murray Smith, as well as her leadership. She's provided a variety of local memberships on financing charges, and et cetera. So I know Deb doesn't like to talk about some of her accomplishments, but when you get to know Deb, there's quite a few of them. So I'll turn it over to her, but I also want you to know, as we go through this, I'm going to make some recommendations on each one of these funds. You're going to see in the sanitary fund that there's a structural problem, but I think there's some ways we can get out of that too. That's been going on since about 2015. And as well as when the 2% increase for residential that went into effect too. So that was before that time. There's always been some issues with the sanitary fund. So I'll turn it over to Deb and we can go through it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Craig. So just make sure are you seeing the single slide or are you seeing that's good?
We're just seeing
it. Great. Okay.
Not a single slide, Deb.
Oh, you're seeing the next slide too?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. We'll switch that over. Swap that. How's that?
There you go.
Okay, great. All right. So we'll start off, as Craig mentioned, talk about sewer and stormwater rate updates. We'll start with stormwater. That one's a little easier to digest. And then we'll talk about sewer and pause there and before going into the follow-up from the water. So the background here is that the master plans and the systems development charges were updated in 2016. So that's when I began working with you all on the sewer and stormwater. My time with the city dates back previous on the water side, but more recently for sewer and storm. The master plans obviously identified the long-term capital improvement needs for the local systems. So here we have both the local and the regional systems to consider and the different funding sources. As part of the work on the master plan, we developed a SDC that differed by area to take into consideration the additional costs associated with the Brookman and Tonkin areas. The regional storm SDC was determined at that time to be sufficient to cover the growth costs with because the regional level was sufficient funding, that there's not the local surcharge on those. And generally, the storm system has more robust funding and better matches the future needs. The rates were reviewed in 2017. At the time, the city, all the cities, developed new intergovernmental agreements with Clean Water Services to establish what the city versus the regional portion of the fees. And as Craig mentioned, at that time, we identified a structural problem with the sewer rates with respect to forecast capital improvements beyond the near term. So about forecast to begin in about 2022, which here we are. But on the stormwater side, the rates are flat fees that are assessed per equivalent service unit. An equivalent service unit is based on impervious area. And the Clean Water Services portion, there's multiple components of the fee. There's the regional rate, which is $2.43. There's a franchise fee that is 12 cents per ESU. And then there's the local rate, which includes a portion that's set by Clean Water Services and a portion that's set by the city. And the combined total is close to $15. The total rate is for an equivalent service unit is $17.49. So a portion of that local rate is subject to the 2%. The other rate that is set by Clean Water Services and remitted back to all the various cities, including Sherwood, is set by Clean Water Services, and those rate increases have varied over the years. I think the last one was about 38 cents. The current, so we evaluate the rates with respect to both the operation and maintenance and the ability to fund the planned capital improvements in the 5-year planning period, but also, as you know from our discussion about water, is to look at the longer term just to make sure that we're positioned to fund things that are further out in the plan, even though there's not as much specificity as in terms of the timing of some of those improvements. The stormwater funding totals about $2.2 million currently, which matches pretty well with the current requirements. And you can see in this bar chart that the operation and maintenance costs, and these are just the city's costs, 1.3 million. And then there's about close to $800,000 then that's available to fund capital in the form of capital transfers for large capital improvements, as well as road-related capital. So when you're doing street projects, that the stormwater can pay for the portion related to stormwater functions, and equipment replacement as well. So good balance there. And in fact, so when we look at the 5 years, so this gives you the full 10-year, and you see that the average, $800,000 a year for capital in most cases, all these bars represent the projected requirements for capital related things. In most years, you're at or below the 800,000. So no problem projected in the 5-year plan for funding the stormwater improvements. There's projected to be an increase further out in the plan in the last half associated with stormwater paying its share of the public works facility, other storm replacements, ongoing water quality facilities, swale, catch basin work, all of that. So if the phasing continues as projected, there would be a need to draw down some reserves in order to potentially to fund those projects. This shows you just in dollars the first 5 years, next 5 years, and the total. The beginning balance for the capital fund is close to $2 million currently. And you can see that the funding sources that would be needed to fund the capital improvements in the first 5 years, operating transfers, and some limited SDC revenue that comes in. These improvements are generally needed to meet existing development needs. And so the operating transfers from rates are sufficient to cover, such that there is some bit of drawing down of the fund balance on the capital side during the first 5 years of the planning period. But if the second 5 years are more significant, as are projected, about $6.5 million, close to $7 million if we include the overhead and reimbursements that come out of that fund, then there's a need to increase the operating transfers and also continue to draw down the fund balance there, unless debt were to be issued here. You can see that in this case, this is the combined gives you the fund forecast on the sort of the operating, and showing that increase in green, the green bars, increasing those capital transfers later on to fund the increase in the capital improvements. And so even in this fund, maintaining though that fund balance clear out to the very end of the plan, because the revenue is projected to match very closely the needed expenses. So in pretty good shape here, and this assumes a 2% increase for the local portion. And as I mentioned, Clean Water Services actually controls the increases that for the local share of their regional rate. And so it's possible even that that their portion of the rate will increase more, and thus there will be more funds available to fund that capital, and you won't need to draw down your fund balances. So it's it looks really good in the short and medium term, and the longer term will, when you update in a few years, you can see based on what increases they have had, this may even look better than it does here. So again, this just shows for the combined reserves, the operating in blue, and then the capital in red, and just shows at the end some potential reduction, but well above sort of minimum contingency fund balance that we would recommend. And so again, well matched revenues, well matched with expenses at the 2% for all customers. Before I go on to sewer, I don't know if you want to pause here and if there's any questions on that, or if you want to wait. Okay.
So you're certainly making assumptions on when those larger capital projects will happen that are new. I don't, in my wildest imagination, think it will take that long before we build some of those larger capital projects. So we're not going to wait until 29 to build a new public works facility. At least we shouldn't. Let me just put it that way. In my opinion, we absolutely should not wait that long. So
I think that.
yeah,
There's certainly flexibility in the Stormwater Fund to move up that expense, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think for water too, based on the recommendations that Craig will share later. The issue is going to be sewer, but we can talk about some potential options there. Anything else before we move on? Okay, so for the current sewer rates are shown here, and a equivalent dwelling unit is the basis for the sewer rates, and that's based on plumbing fixture units. There's also the volume component per 100 cubic feet, and the city's locally controlled fee is $5.72 on the fixed and 35 cents per CCF on the variable. So a rather small portion of the overall bill that a customer receives is for the city's portion of the costs. So here, as we've talked about, the structural issue in terms of that the revenue currently about 780,000 is not sufficient to cover the operation and it covers the operation and maintenance costs, but not to fund capital. So that includes equipment and vehicle replacement, as well as capital transfers for local sewer improvements. The good news is that in the first 5 years, the majority of the projects and the costs are associated with the regional capital improvement plan. So the Clean Water Services CIP, which is these green bars. So a lot of the funding is going to come from the Clean Water Services rates and the collective funding of the district. The red represents the TEA area. So their developer funding, urban renewal funds to fund most of that infrastructure, and a just relatively small portion, the blue, is what then would need to be covered by the local city rates. So luckily, not a lot forecast need in the first 5 years. That is assuming that the public works facility is later on in the plan. But the projections for the second half of the 10-year period are that there would be more significant local needs, which, as you can see, based on the projections and the ability to transfer capital from the operating fund, that's where we run into some potential shortfalls if there are not additional funds available. So this just shows you in total, there is 2.2 million beginning fund balance on the capital side now. So you can fund the near-term improvements, again, with significant funding coming for the Rock Creek Trunk and the other pipelines in the TEA from those other funding sources. And then it's the second 5 years where the capital improvements at this point in time are estimated to be about 2.5 million, which additional funding will be needed for those. And this just shows the projected, here we have assumed a 3% rate increase for commercial. There are lots of examples where cities charge commercial customers higher rates than residential. There are specific services that the city performs just for commercial customers that includes fats, oils, and grease program and inspections. So there's a cost basis for charging higher rates for commercial. And but even with a 3% increase for commercial and a 2% for residential, there is still not much funding available for capital that's projected here. So, and we've assumed that the fund balance would not be drawn down completely, that there is that fund balance that's shown, the purple line, is intended to fund vehicle and equipment replacement and meet your minimum operating contingency. So there is some funds to remain in the operating fund. It's just a question of how to fund those additional capital improvements that are projected for the latter half of the plan. So that's the real question. In terms of, we showed you at the last meeting, we showed you the comparison for the water rates. This chart shows you where Sherwood is kind of right in between Wilsonville and Tigard in terms of the total sewer and stormwater bill, about $61 per month. So in summary, stormwater looks good. Revenue projections, the financial plan incorporates a 2% increase for the local charges. We've assumed 2% for the CWS portion, but that has been and is projected to be higher. So most likely the forecast will actually improve from what we're showing you here. And there's good availability of funding to meet the projected requirements. Sewer, even with the 2%, 3%, still an issue, because you're relying on fund balance now to cover city capital. A 2% rate increase, even 3% in the inflationary time that we're in, isn't going to gain traction in terms of being able to fund more capital. It's basically going to keep pace with just the costs that you're paying now. So that's going to be the issue. And I don't know, Craig, if you wanted to talk about some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, on the sewer side, a couple things come into really kind of concerned on borrowing money and if we can actually pay debt with the sewer fund when we can't even do projects with the small amount of money, additional money. So a little bit concerned there. One of the things that I was thinking that just going to throw it out there to have a conversation is we have a right-of-way fee or a franchise fee we get from CWS, probably 150 to 170,000 a year, something like that. That probably goes into the general fund. That could stay in the sanitary fund over the 10 years and probably help offset bigger rate increases for the commercial side, as well as, I mean, you're gonna have to stick with the 2%. So that's just throwing that out there. That could be one option, as well as maybe putting a little bit of, I know we're gonna have a discussion later after the first of the year on ARPA funds, if there's any opportunity to put a little bit of money into the sanitary funds to be able to fund some of the projects. I know everybody probably wants to use that other places, but that would help this. Those two options would help this fund. And I'm just curious what other folks think about that, but that would be my recommendation without borrowing money.
So to say I was not generally pleased with the presentation is an understatement, but we need to have options come back from staff to fix the sewer with, here's a suite of options, and suggestions for, not just a 3% annual increase for commercial, what does other increases look like? What are other ideas that staff has? So I want to know the variety of options before weighing in on anything. On both of these, neither one of them talks about SDC rates, but I understand that we're going to be making some adjustments to the master plans on both, and those will be coming back to us. Is that right?
So I think, Mayor, on the SDC rates, Clean Water Service sets the storm regional rate. We need to actually make some minor modifications in our master plan to account for some stuff since 2016, 17, when it was last updated. And, maybe look at some different options out there for a surcharge, but Clean Water Service sets that rate. As far as the sanitary rate, Clean Water Services sets a rate of about a little over $6,000 for SDCs, and the city portion of that is 3.9%. So a little over, it's 3.9%. And Clean Water Service gets the bigger portion of that, 96 point something % of the SDCs is how that works. But those, we'd have to get some legal advice on if there could be a surcharge SDC of some sorts for the city.
What I'm asking for.
To be able to undertake those, in the near future and long term, because we do have projects that aren't completely funded by Clean Water Services, that we're upsizing some of our system that, the ratepayers as well as future development's going to. And so we need to actually look at that. And I don't feel comfortable with spending a little bit of time in the master plans for the storm and sanitary, pulling stuff out for the rates that we are as long as we are on the water side, being able to do some of those things. So that's where I'm talking about some minor modifications to the plan. I think they're good plans. I just think there needs to be some minor modifications and more of the old town taken in, incorporate that than what happened in 2016, 17.
Yeah. Okay.
So any other questions on the storm and the sewer? Sewer rates have been raised. So, I mean, this would be something that we would be looking at, July 1st of next year for these rate increases moving forward.
So again, I'm not
more than
on the
happy
page with sewer personally.
Yeah, I think we need to have more conversations. More than happy to bring back some different options, how we get there.
And then please make sure Storm is still okay if those larger capital projects happen faster than 29.
Okay.
Because if there's any doubt, we should just be sure we're going to be good if those things happen faster than modeled right here. Because I'm ready to, aren't we? We're starting the visioning of designing and all of that of the darn place.
Yep.
Awesome. Any other
And
comments or questions?
I also think that what you're going to see here pretty soon is in the construction world, you're going to see a lot of contractors doing work. There's not going to be a lot of contractors that are going to be able to do some of this work. So a lot of these projects that are in the next 3 years could get shifted a little bit because there's not going to be enough contractors to do the work for everybody. So that's going to be the next big crunch, I think, that's going to happen when it comes to the bidding wars. So, but just keep that in mind as we go through this, just because stuff's, tied in for the next 3 years. There could be, once some of this infrastructure bill comes out for funding, I think it's going to be hard to get some of the contractors to do the work. So anyways, more than happy to bring back some information on sewer and work with David and Keith and come up with a plan.
And just as a reminder, on the residential, when we raise it 2%, that's the max we can, right? According to that charter amendment that passed a few years ago.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's my understanding from Josh, since it's went into play on the local shares.
Okay.
All right, Deb.
Yeah, we need to fix them both, and I've past 10 years it's more fuzzy world, but fundamentally our reserve level needs to increase over time because of the cost value of money. So we should always be putting more and more, having a larger and larger carry forward balance. And when we get to the water, I think it has to accelerate faster than that, just because of at some point we will have aged infrastructure and we have to definitely be replacing that long after our days are done. We want to have the dollars to do it.
Aaron, I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is for Craig and maybe Deb. So as Kim mentioned, we have that voter/charter mandated 2% cap on the residential rates. What are the other comparable city rates around? Tualatin, Tigard's a lot bigger, but I mean, are they around 2%? Are they more than 2%?
No, more. Depends on which bucket. If it's sewer, it's certainly more.
So I know that the original idea was, that, citizens don't want to pay more than they have to, but are we losing the race when it comes to maintaining infrastructure, replacing vehicles, those kinds of things? And then, it looks pretty dismal in, 2029. Maybe that's not a question, but.
Correct.
Yeah.
Nationally, sewer and water rates have been going up at double the rate of inflation for the reason that was mentioned, the need to continue to replace infrastructure. Yeah. So at 2%, which in some cases has been below the inflation rate when you consider the capital intensive nature of these systems, yes, you have lost ground in terms of being able to fund any capital, new or replacement infrastructure. And other cities are in the region as well as nationally generally seeing rate increases significantly higher.
Well, and as a side note, as we at some point when Sherwood West comes into play, everything. Some of that infrastructure is going to, the original first infrastructure will fall on the city's shoulders as developers come in. They'll pay for part of that, but if our bucket has a bunch of holes in the bottom, we're going to have a hard time, maintaining the quality of life that the citizens in Sherwood want to have. So, thanks, Deb.
You're welcome.
All right.
On to water.
Yep.
Okay. So the refinements we made to the plan since we met with council last was we made some modifications to the forecast in terms of some of the expenses on the local capital fund overhead fleet reimbursements. Also, we modeled in the January 1, 2022 commercial rate increase that had occurred in the council discussed and adopted earlier this month or last month, I believe. And then we developed a debt option for funding some of the near-term major capital improvements. And what the numbers that I'm going to present to you are based on $10 million, 20-year full faith and credit obligation at a 2% interest rate. And I think David will maybe talk about other options. The SDCs we also revised. This is a dynamic time in terms of construction costs, as Craig mentioned, and subsequent to the meeting that we had with council, additional information came in from the consulting engineers about what they're anticipating that capital costs are going to increase between now and when the city adopts a new SDC methodology. So we need to incorporate those costs into the project list. We also updated usage information to reflect the peak periods from this current year as additional data was available. And then we're presenting an alternative methodology for the reimbursement component of the SDC, which is based on replacement costs. So that increases the reimbursement fee. The other two, obviously the project list increase, that increases the improvement fee, and then the demand numbers actually impact both components. The updated, and I'm not going to show you all the same slides I showed you last time, but just to see on this slide, this shows the green bar, capital fund balance going up as debt proceeds are assumed, $10 million debt issuance, and then being spent down, back down to fund the near-term capital. What this is just showing you the capital fund. So basically, the idea is that you would issue the debt, use the proceeds to pay for the improvements, and then be spending some of the funds that are already in the capital fund and not having transfers over in the short term from the operating side. So you're preserving the fund balance, the combined fund balance. So this is the updated capital fund table, and we're looking at over the 10-year period about $34 million of improvements, of which 10 million would be funded from debt. And there is still an assumption of $2 million from urban renewal funding, significant SDC funding, and this could be higher depending on if council chooses to go with the higher option in terms of the SDC, the updated SDC methodology options that we're presenting. So those numbers could actually come in a little bit higher and reduce the amount that has to be funded from rates. So this is the updated water fund forecast. And as I mentioned, the green bars, that capital transfer, basically wouldn't really be needed in the short term because of the debt proceeds, pay that down and then restart the transfers. What that does is it increases the fund balance in the operating fund. I mean, you could still be transferring over every year some, wherever the money is sitting. It's basically, it's combined resources of the water fund. This does assume a continued 3% rate increase for commercial, and in subsequent years. Again, because in a inflationary environment and the need over the longer period to continue to fund significant capital, and you are continuing to pay, you have existing debt service that needs to be paid off. we kept the commercial rate increase at 3%. And you can see at a certain point that the total bars that are needed to fund the capital do drop or do exceed the revenue that's projected in those years. But in the short term, we actually have the reverse. This shows the total reserve. So there is still a decline in reserves at this level of funding, at this level of rate increase, in order to fund what's projected in terms of the capital improvements, $34 million. And again, that is with the $10 million bond proceeds. But the bars in terms of where the projected ending fund balance is in the out years is higher than it was obviously in the prior assumptions that we presented council at the last meeting. And I don't know if David wanted to talk about this slide.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about it. I know Deb, she built into her model 10 million at 20 years at a 2% rate. You could see that payment would roughly be $611,000. But I also want to throw out other options in there and say, well, what happens if rates, because we are in a pretty precarious inflationary times, so what if rates are 2.5%? We could see there'd be about a $30,000 difference on a 20-year, bond. Well, what if we went to 10 million at 30 years? You can see the payments are a lot lower, thus potentially, building up those reserves in the water fund, making things improve even better. So I just wanted to kind of give council a kind of a general overall view of, different rates. And of course, when you borrow for 30, rates are always a little bit higher. This is more just kind of giving different scenarios just to keep in the back of your mind.
Okay, thanks. For the SDCs, as I mentioned, we brought back two options. The current SDC methodology is based on original cost for the reimbursement fee. Both of the options have been updated to reflect higher inflation and projected higher cost of the project list. So the improvement fee is higher than what we had shown you before. And in the replacement cost option for the reimbursement fee, it is significantly higher than under the original cost method that is currently the basis. The compliance fee is the same in both. That's the costs associated with complying with the SDC statutes. And you can see that we are now looking at an SDC that is roughly $8,000 up to $8,800 per equivalent dwelling unit, which is a 23 to 35% increase over the current SDC of 6,540. So significant increase from, I think what I showed you before was closer to 7,000. And when we reran the numbers to incorporate the higher costs, some additional land costs associated with pump stations, and then to provide you with another option that council has flexibility, and it's really a policy decision. There are certain policy decisions along the way in terms of building the methodology, and one of those is how do you want to value the existing system based on the original cost or the book value that takes out the depreciation or replacement costs. So what we've done here is based on the year that the asset was placed in service, we've added the inflation that has occurred as recorded by the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index. So there are cities around the state use anything from the book value up to the replacement cost. And so all are defensible, acceptable methods. This shows you an updated comparison for the SDCs. For the current is shown in orange, and then just to the right of that is based on the original cost. It's a significant increase, but doesn't change your position with respect to this group of cities. But if you go to the replacement cost, you would be right at about the same level as Beaverton and just under what Tigard is charging. I say that these are numbers are draft. We did, I think these are at the 95% confidence level. Craig and I were making some last minute changes to the construction costs on the project list as that additional information came in. So we would do just one last sort of review of that just to make sure we are capturing all of the costs and doing the best that we can with the volatility in the market to estimate fair and equitable costs. So the debt proceeds do help preserve the projected reserve levels. They do still drop because there is still a limitation on the rate increase, at least for residential. And but we have included the slightly higher commercial rate increases continuing on in the plan. And with the additional SDCs, you have some options there to increase those to help fund those capital improvements and to preserve some of that, either to take the pressure off the rates or to increase the reserve levels by keeping rate funds in the funds. And at this point, we have not assumed any other funding, ARPA funding, or anything for these projects. So there is still uncertainty with respect to external funding sources, and that could potentially improve these plans as well. Craig, did you have anything to add?
So as far as recommendation on this, the water part of it, I would recommend that we go with the replacement value, for raising the SDCs that Deb showed. One thing we've heard all the way back to probably 2012 is the community wanted development to pay for development and not the ratepayers. So that actually gets us up. Those dollars, as Deb mentioned, we're expecting a 30% increase in ductile iron this year, 30% increase next year through 2024. And that's what this rate has. That's the numbers we've used, as well as land purchase for a pump station, as it was mentioned in the slide. So everything is covered that is in our master plan, our equipment replacement list, everything that I'm aware of that lasts till that master plan is completed from replacement. I think we have a better replacement cost in here for upsizing any of our existing mains that can be covered from SDCs as well. So that's why I would be recommending the higher amount to move forward. And there is a process, if you choose, that we go through the SDC rate increase, that we'll have to, it takes some time to go through that, at least 90 days, if not a little bit longer after it's been notified. So that's would be my recommendation, as well as some sort of a debt, taking out some debt on the water fund to be able to fund some of these projects and keep our reserves up.
Council, thought on the SDC methodology? I agree with Craig. Does it?
Me too.
Also agree with Craig.
Yes, I agree as well.
Sounds pretty universal there. Debt issuance, Keith.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Staff looked at this. We spent time examining this. Craig's recommendation comes from us looking at the short term and also looking at the financing we have available. So I would concur with Craig's recommendation of the $10 million 20-year loan that we recommended in this presentation off of.
So you prefer 20 versus 30?
I personally do, yes. But it is a decision of the council. If the council has a sway that way, I would understand. But my recommendation would be the 20-year.
Hey, Keith, what K2? What is the reason for? Why do you say that?
Why the shorter term?
Yep.
I think because you can generally get better rates, as we saw some of those higher rates that come in long term, and just the long term debt obligation in terms of 20 is typically what we do in the cities. That's what we're comfortable. That's sort of in the wheelhouse of what we're comfortable with.
Mhm.
And that I think it gets a little more uncomfortable for us. So that's from a staff point of view, the 20-year was what we preferred. And over time, you do pay a little less in terms of inflationary rates, which is of course a big factor.
Hey, David, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Dave, what's your opinion about the 30-year versus the 20-year?
Typically you do see, as Keith was saying, you do see mainly 20 years. It's far and few when you start seeing 30-year loans, debt, and just kind of looking at, the needs of the water fund. I would agree, the 20 years would probably be our best bet. And of course, it doesn't mean that I can't ask, for any and all options, and we can see what investors are potentially willing to provide the city. It's something I could always throw out there, and it's not difficult for them in their request for proposals to ask for that. I think when we went out for the URA debt, there's maybe only a handful of companies that came back with 30 years. Mainly you saw a lot of 20 years, even some 15 years, but typically in the municipality world, you don't see many 30-year debt issuances. But it's
Thank you.
I'd be interested in just getting feedback, hearing what, pitch it both ways, and then circle back. The money, the rate, it's essentially free money with rates that low.
Yeah, that won't be a problem. And I think we did that for the URE too, just, give it a kind of a range of options up to 30 years. So.
And it seems like the difference in payment was like $250,000 ish, something like that.
Yeah.
And so, I remember, as a beginning counselor, I thought, wow, that's like all the money in the world. I realized it's not a huge amount, but $250,000 is still quite a bit different, especially if we have a lot of these projects coming up. So anyway, thank you.
Like the sewer fund, I'd want options coming back with a recommendation from staff on what we need to start. We need to fix the rates one way or another in the 10-year window that isn't working.
Well, I think, as a citizen, the 2%, awesome, except as a citizen, I don't want my community to suffer at large, and for our possibilities to provide services to everybody, in the city. I don't, because as Craig's right, as our infrastructure ages, we're going to have to dig it out and replace it. Well, we got to have some money in the fund to do that, and that's got to be everybody's share. 2% has been great, but it almost doesn't seem reasonable. And you indicated and Deb indicated that's in some cases that's quite a bit lower than other cities. I don't think we should charge more, but anyway, that's my opinion.
Yeah, well, what we got doesn't work, so we have to fix it one way or the other. We either need to hear about the options.
It feels broken, doesn't it?
It absolutely is broken.
Yeah.
But I have 3 scenarios on my mind without barely thinking about it. So and none of them are, I don't know. They're all viable. And I won't talk openly about it. We can do it when we can let staff put the stuff together, and I'll even whisper in K2's ear, say, this could do blank, 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 blank. Any other,
Keith? If we
yes,
wanted to go higher than the 2%, we'd have to go out for a vote, correct?
for residential, correct?
And so if we were able to communicate that message and that story, that would possibly be another option.
That's one of them for sure.
Okay.
Yep. And Craig, is it safe to say whatever you're projecting to spend on pipe in 23, you'll buy it in 22 and save the 30%?
We'll try to do our best on what we can, but even with the broadband stuff going on right now, it's tough to do. So
yeah. Crazy cost increases.
It's crazy.
Hey, before we exit the work session, I would like to say that I just feel like the city is so fortunate to have, Craig at the helm of this department. And I feel so confident. I kind of wish he was my next door neighbor, but I feel so confident having Craig, really thoroughly thinking every bit of this plan through. I don't feel like there's anything that he hasn't thought about. And I feel like, I feel confident that we can come up with a viable solution, because I feel like you are handling our infrastructure. It's not getting out of hand, but as we look down the road, we have to make an adjustment. So anyway, I just wanted to say I appreciate that a lot. And I love the lights downtown, by the way. The Public Works Department did a great job. Great job.
Well, thank you. But this is just not me. There's a whole team behind this.
Yeah, sure.
Deb's done a great job over the years of keeping us going. And it goes all the ways, from our engineering folks working on this to the finance folks. It's just not one individual.
Yeah.
It's a team effort when we do this. So.
Yeah, you are the team leader, though, Craig.
So
you're the captain of that team.
They deserve the credit. So.
So take that credit back to them, Craig. You're
I
doing
will.
a great job.
Yes, I will.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
We're so appreciative.
All right, we're a little running over time, but anything else on this K2?
No, we'll take what we heard today, and we'll be back.
Excellent. All right.
Do we exit and
adjourned.
come back?
There's
What?
Do we exit and come back for the executive session? Okay.